All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Crash Bang Boom podcast. We're mixing it up today with the guest host and my drumming buddy, Chris Enriquez of Brooklyn's own Epicac recording artist Spotlights, who, of course, got to sit down with mutual drumming favorite, kelliiscott. Kellii, of course, plays in one of our generally favorite bands and the one and only space rockers, Failure. So thanks to Chris for stepping in while I was trekking across the other side of the world in Thailand and Cambodia, eating weird shit and getting even weirder. But Chris and Kellii touch on early influences, Kellii's first snare drum and drum set, the evolution of Failure Records, his love for Iron Maiden and philcollins, their new record, In the Future, Your Mind Will Be the Furthest Thing from Your Body, plus their present tour with Swervedriver, as well as a Pee-Tuba story, which totally sounded like something I would have done at some point in my life, maybe even present time, which is pretty ridiculous. Shout out to my sponsor, New Orleans Record Press. If you're looking at releasing vinyl, go on over to neworleansrecordpress.com to check out packaging, mastering, electroplating, lacquer cutting options, as well as a real-time quote generator. And they print both 12 and 7-inch records at both 150 and 180 gram variants. And no shortage of ridiculously beautiful vinyl coloring options to boot. Need assistance with design or have further questions? Give them a holler, and that's neworleansrecordpress.com. Crash Bang Boom podcast is available on my SoundCloud, iTunes podcast, Google Play, my YouTube page, as well as Stitcher, and even more apparently. Check out my Instagram and Facebook pages. Give me a like, a subscription, a follow, or a solid-ass review, or all of the aforementioned. It'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks again to Chris Enriquez, whose new Spotlights record entitled Love and Decay will be out April 26th. Be on the lookout for it, as well as Failure out on tour right now with the one and only Swervedriver. Also of note, my solo record entitled Proficient Prototypes will be out April 18th. Bandcamp links and info coming soon, so keep your eyes and ears peeled. Without further ado, here we go. kelliiscott, Failure. Crash Bang Boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
Welcome to Crash Bang Boom. I am your guest host, Chris Enriquez from Spotlights, and I'm here at Warsaw, Brooklyn with kelliiscott from Failure.
My old friend.
Yes, thank you. That makes me feel so special because you're one of my favorite drummers.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's really cool to talk to you because I feel like you've been very underserved all these years and you've been doing it for a long time. And, you know, we were just talking a little bit before I hit record here, and you had a lot of interesting stuff to say about how you feel about musicians have a different voice sometimes in terms of like the individual and where it comes from. And I want to know your story and tell that to everybody today, if that's okay with you.
Musicians interviewing musicians.
Right.
They have a completely unique perspective. And you tend to find out, like those type of interviewers, you find out more about the person being interviewed because the questions are different. The questions come from a place of, I can use my actual experience because I know what you're going through and how you got here.
Right, and your emotions
Generally.
and all that, everything, your whole makeup, whole makeup.
You know, and there's a language that musicians have when they're talking to musicians that interviewers come up with questions. Mm-hmm. You know, and musicians talking to musicians, you tend to talk more about yourselves, like a normal conversation.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about a band like Failure too, is because I think that you guys have had a profound influence on so many bands that people wouldn't even realize.
Which is crazy.
Right. I mean, you guys have had an influence on you know, you've heard this a million times, but everyone from Paramore to A Perfect Circle and everyone in between, Cavein.
So Brodsky's going to be here tonight.
That's great, you know, and not to get too off topic, but he paid homage to you guys a long time ago when they covered
and
Magnified.
Always does. He actually, I thought he still lived in Boston, so I hit him up. He's like, no, I live in Brooklyn now. And then he texts me back a half hour later. He's like, dude, my dad wants to come down to the show. Can you put his dad, Phil? Can you put him on the list?
Yeah.
I was like, well, yeah, of course. But we're going to see Steven tonight. in
That's
Brooklyn.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And this is a great place for you guys. You guys have always done well in New York. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to sit here and talk about you and really dive into your life and where you came from. So,
well, it's funny. I mean, you brought up being an influence on other bands. I mean, it's still even just, it's not something I normally say out loud. Mm-hmm. And I just did to just sort of get us back to where we started and what you said. Like, that's not what I imagined for myself. As I think most kids, when they, you know, my experience when I got that Kiss record for the first time and opened up the gatefold, which earlier we were talking about, like the reason we make double records and make so much music on records is because it's about the experience. And we want it to translate like the experience we had when we were kids, where you hold something physical. It's like a legitimate experience that takes time.
It's an amazing thing to hear from you too, because that's what your records have done for many people. I think the concepts behind Fantastic Planet, and even though maybe magnified, and that's more for you to say. It seemed Fantastic Planet had more of a concept behind it. Regardless of what failure record is, they all, to me at least, have taken the listener on a really cool journey, and that's what has made you guys really special, I think, aside from the specifics of how the guitar sounds and all the other cool stuff that you guys do, the albums and how they go from one song into the next and the segues. But before we go totally into that, I do want to start from the beginning with you. Where are you from, and can you take us back to some of your first musical moments, perhaps when you, when you first discovered music?
Sure. I'm from Los Angeles. My dad was in the military. He was on submarines. Okay. So I moved around quite a bit. I was born in San Diego and lived in Groton, Connecticut for a while, and Maryland for a while. Eventually, I had an older brother and sister, and I think my parents started to figure out pretty quickly that the moving around wasn't necessarily good for children. Mm-hmm. So they decided to settle in Orlando, and my dad would just go to other cities to do his deploys, but the family would stay in Orlando. Right. I would say, as far as music, I don't have any musicians in my family. But my father was extremely musical, like lots of Motown and oldies. Of course, my older brother and sister were like, Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. And we always lived near the ocean, so we had these things called hurricane rooms on the military housing.
Sure.
And that's where the stereo would be. And we would each go in there and, we'd have free reign. And because it was a hurricane room, you could turn it up loud and blast your stuff.
What a cool
and it was just like my dad had his music, my brother had his music, my sister had her music. And my brother gave me all of his Kiss 8 tracks, and now I have my music. For me and Kiss, because of the makeup and, the live records and just the whole mystery of like, who are these people and the dress up. And, I was probably about 7 or 8. Like, it was just, my imagination just kind of took hold, and I would sit in that room with tennis rackets and jam out. And, it just put me in a place where everything was cool and everything was okay. And, it was just like sort of the eye of the storm. And then eventually that morphed into, I broke all the tennis rackets and, broke my hockey stick, and my brother caught me with his hockey stick and kind of beat the crap out of me.
This is, of course, air guitaring?
Yeah. And then Lincoln Logs with Pots and Pans is when I first physically started doing something musical.
Now, when you did the Pots and Pans, obviously, I'm going to assume that you were playing drums on them.
Yeah, with Kiss records.
Yes. So what, at what point when you're doing this do you realize that drums are something you're gravitating to the most? And how
At no point. Okay. At no point. I'm still in make-believe world.
Yeah.
My own private concert. And it doesn't matter what instrument I'm playing. I'm also singing. I don't know if you remember the dentist after a checkup would give you those little red pills.
Right.
And you chew on them, and it sticks to the plaque to show how well you're brushing.
Right.
I would get boatloads of those, and I would chew on them and like drool them out in the mirror. And sometimes I'd like turn my head sideways so I could see my profile with a can of hairspray.
Yeah.
can of hairspray and a lighter, and so it looked
Wow.
like fire was coming out of my mouth. Like I was insane.
I mean, hey, there was never a fire-breathing drummer that I had ever seen. So if you still
well,
want to bring
I
that
wasn't
back,
a drummer yet.
Yeah,
I was
right.
I was all of the above.
Yeah.
I didn't hone in and really start to gravitate towards drums until like probably around 7th grade. There was a lot of breakdancing, you're wearing your slippery prints and bringing, cardboard boxes to school, and, people are starting to beatbox, and, this is like the early 80s, and I'm, playing on your desks, like playing beats on your desks. That's what sort of catapulted me into drums.
Did you feel like, because that's all very percussive, obviously, and when you have
My
that
parents
sort of-
started to get complaints.
Okay.
About me just like making a racket on my desk.
Wow.
And they had the idea of, because they were all about school, like I always did well in school, and they were starting to hear some guff from some of my teachers, so they kind of nipped it right at the bud. They're like, look, dude, like, we don't want to hear from your teachers unless it's something great.
Right.
We'll get you a snare drum.
Wow, look at that.
You
So,
have to join band, and if you stick with it, like, we'll invest in getting you a drum set.
That's
Like
so
it was
cool.
mostly their idea.
So it's funny because some parents might look at that and not necessarily the first thing would come to mind is let's buy him a drum set.
No, they were all about, because again, my older brother and sister found a lot of trouble, and they wanted to keep me in something constructive.
How old are you at this time when you get your first drum set?
12.
When you picked up your drums for the first time, obviously you said you were sort of using your imagination, tapping around, being around a lot of this percussive stuff. Did it come natural to the point where you were self-taught, or did you get lessons? Like, how did you actually learn?
Well, it started with the snare drum a couple months before I got the drum set, and I had this teacher, classically trained teacher named Mr. Ensfelder, if you're listening. I wanted to play the drums, like, the rototoms or the snare drum at least. And the first day of class, he kind of poo-pooed, like, me wanting to be a rock drummer and grow up and move to L.A., like, just poo-pooed the whole idea. And he gave me a rubber pad and a big pair of sticks and told me I had to hold them this way and a set of bells.
Okay.
And I just, from the gate, was not into it. That's not what, I had gone from this make-believe world where I'd been running rock concerts for like the last 4 years.
Right.
And what is this whole thing? And he and I just, we didn't get along. I did, some kind of funny, but, in hindsight, bad things to get basically kicked out of the class.
You're trying to get away to probably focus on the things you actually want to do, right?
Yeah. Well, they wound up putting me in. There was this. I wasn't a bad kid. Like, I had great grades. I just needed to get out of this class. But they saw it as a warning sign. So I got out of band, and they wound up putting me in this thing called cop shop.
Okay, what's cop shop?
We had a deputy at the school. I can't remember his name. He was actually a very sweet guy. I liked him a lot. And he was responsible for the at-risk kids.
Right.
There was a class to, like, deter you away from drugs and, winding up in trouble and that kind of stuff.
What were some of the things you were doing to try to get yourself out of class?
I was just always disrupting the class and being a nuisance, and I would get sent to the office, and, it all kind of, the straw that broke the camel's back. I had band after lunch, and we had these practice rooms, and I went in there and peed in a tuba.
Oh, wow. I really hope no one used that afterwards.
They used the tuba, and the tuba got blown, and some people got pee on them.
Wow.
I mean, it was horrible.
That is the first I've ever heard of someone peeing in a tuba. That's hilarious.
I would never do that today. But it did get me out of the class, and my parents did still get me a drum set. The drum set showed up under the Christmas tree.
So you had the whole drum set, cymbals, the whole thing.
My parents bought me, and they didn't know anything about drums, neither did I.
Right.
They bought me a drum set for, it was either like $125, maybe $250. They didn't make a lot of money, so it was definitely super cheap. It was a 1969 pink champagne Ludwig.
That sounds Really cool.
Which is worth a fortune today.
Yeah, and it sounds beautiful.
It was a little 22-inch kick with a 12-inch tom and a little, I don't know, I can't remember whether it was a 14-inch or a 16-inch floor tom, with the cymbal coming out of the kick drum.
So
original pasty cymbals. It was this older gentleman that owned it, was like an active jazz drummer.
Yeah.
And I think he was probably just too old now to play his drums, so he was getting rid of it. And
Talk about lucking out for your first kit. Yeah, I mean, that'll really affect
I didn't know that, though. A couple years later, like, I wound up trading it in for the Ludwig rocker because Rick Allen was all over all the drum magazines pushing the Ludwig rocker
he lost his arm,
when he still had two arms. And I traded it in and gave them $150 for a Ludwig, which was still a great kit. I wish I still had that kit.
Well, I'm also curious too now. So when you get your first kit, are you self-taught? Did you figure?
Self-taught.
Okay, yeah.
Self-taught.
I love that.
Well, I say self-taught, but intuitively I knew enough that I was going to stick with playing the drums the way I had already stuck with putting on my rock shows.
Okay.
I set up a lamp next to my drum set so it would cascade my reflection onto the wall.
Yep.
And I would turn out all the lights.
Love it.
So it was like a spotlight.
That's really
And, you know, it was still partly imagination, putting on my own rock show for an audience of one. Right. And I just played along with all my favorite records.
I'm guessing playing live is your favorite part of being in a band.
It is and it isn't. I mean, there's a certain, when you successfully record a song or a record and it goes out with a hitch and it's work, but not too much work on your part. Like, you just don't have it together, so you're having to work, like, when that thing doesn't happen. Because anyone out there listening, it's not as easy as it may look.
Sure.
I mean, I can only speak for myself, and I mean, I've been playing a long time, and I still work hard when I play.
Yeah, and it shows.
It's not like this thing where all of a sudden it's so effortless and you're like, you know, I work, I got to pay attention and I got to focus, and I work really hard to get it right, and sometimes it's better than other times. And I mean, that's why I continue to do it, because it's always like a work in progress. Yep. And it's interesting, and there is no the best.
Your drumming and failure in general, I think, has benefited a lot from Ken being a producer and engineer. And when I watch you guys, not only, to me, I'll break this statement into two, your playing to me is very precise, and you have enough happening, busyness with fills, but you keep them consistent every time I see you, and the band, for that matter, has that. That doesn't happen often, because a lot of times from musician to musician, you see sort of an improv thing happen quite often. When you go see a live show, you might be air drumming, watching a band, and then it's not the same. I
mean, I mean, it's funny you say that, because in the 90s, you know, there would be like the nuts and bolts of a song. Like, obviously, I'm going to keep the same verse beat and chorus beat and things like that. But I would always try and perform the songs a different way live.
Okay.
And I always thought that was really cool. And I mean, it was really cool in one instance, because every time you play a show, the viewer's getting something different. And I would watch dudes like Danny Carey, who just plays everything so precise and exactly the same every single night, and like the Neil Pearts, and actually a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
And I later on, and I'm sure we'll touch on it, you know, years later when I got sober, and I was looking in just my character itself, not necessarily my playing. I had this thing about my character where I would make these really cool sounding stories to cover up the fact that it was just too much work to go back and learn all of that stuff. And, you know, maybe part of me, it was kind of cool to play it differently every night, but maybe I really did want to do that, but I also really didn't want to do all the work that it takes to go back and learn all of that stuff, note by note by note by note. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Again, after getting sober and, coming back, and like now that we're rebooting and stuff, like now I have, because playing music is no longer about me and getting what I want.
Right.
And it took me stop playing music and again, like, not being a drug addict.
Yeah.
To realize that, all those years I spent wielding this thing that, was given to me. There's no explanation for why I've been able to do it as long or why I've gotten as good at it. I mean, it certainly is not because of a whole, like, large effort of my own.
I think
something decided that I was going to be able to do this really well despite myself.
The sobriety thing, I want to congratulate you, by the way. Yes. I mean, how long has it been?
2004. It's almost 15 years now.
That's fantastic.
In May 18th.
Taking it from you also, I just celebrated 4 months yesterday.
The hardest 4 months to get.
It's tough, but I feel like playing is, like you were saying a little bit, it is really benefited.
It's a place for you to dump all that stuff inside of you, like we were talking earlier, your voice.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, but so going back, when we rebooted and I went back and learned all the notes.
Right.
And did pre-production before we would start rehearsals. Somewhere in between the time that we had broken up, I mean, it dawned on me, like, how important all those notes on a record are to the listener.
Absolutely.
When they show up, because they've been, like, listening the same way I did when I was a kid.
You listen to Peter Criss.
You learn all of these records front to back, and if you were ever to go see them, like, those magic moments is where you're playing along with the drummer and you're both playing together and you're having this moment, and it's like, your personal moment with the band who, you've just been in a room by yourself with, and now you're in the same room. And so I now make the effort to learn those things. I definitely leave a little bit of room to, it's not necessarily night from night or anything like that, but I play the song the way it's supposed to be played.
Right.
And leave a little bit of room to, like, add, like, small things that maybe people don't even notice.
Sure. Yeah, and I feel like the thing, though, even if you are doing that, it's still very focused. And I get that as a fan when I watch you guys. You play behind these glass sort of isolators that keep the sound focused, and the
it
playing
keeps
and
it
the
out
whole
of the
thing.
microphones. Yeah. Cool.
They look cool, and they also they create a sound that we don't see often when other rock bands come to town.
Yeah.
So you think some of the musicians maybe might appreciate it more than others, but I really think that when you guys have your stage set up that way, it's I've talked to people. I'm not just saying this because you're here, but like people all walks of life who have come to me and said they're one of the best live bands I've ever seen. Yeah. And I think that the best thing about the live show is
that's humbling, because there's a lot of mind-blowing live bands out there.
No, I mean this too. And again, I'm not just kissing your ass here. It's like, you're doing it in a way where the music is speaking for itself. It's not like you guys are blowing fire out of your mouths while you're playing and wearing costumes. And
we're not big personalities.
As you're developing as a player and sort of finding your own identity, who are your sort of main influences? Because I've found, what I think might be your influences, and I could be wrong. So I'd love to hear from you, what you really drew your style from.
Growing up, I mean, I had, some of the obvious ones, John Bonham, Stuart Copeland, loved Clive Burr and Niko Mcbrain. I'm still a huge Iron Maiden fan. I had a really, because I was a kid, I had a Motley Crue, Tommy Lee obsession.
Yep.
Part of the reason I moved to LA is in the 80s, especially a lot of my favorite, rock bands from that time were all from LA. So that was an influence in my geographical decision. I mean, I get influence definitely as I grow older. Like, there were definitely people who influenced my playing early on, because those are the records that I would play along with.
Formative, experiences.
But once I started to get out to LA, and it's like, now this is what I do, I would have to say the biggest influence on my playing were the bands and the people that I was starting to play with.
Okay.
And the way I was, well, only because I was responding to music that wasn't like any of those things that I had played along with when I was a kid. And even those things, like when I would play along with records, I would like learn the nuts and bolts of the records, but I would always leave room for myself to embellish and play my own fills in there. So I was playing with the band.
You said yourself you're an Iron Maiden fan. You know, we might not hear that in your playing so much, but when you get in a room with Ken Andrews,
you do to a degree. I mean, like when you listen to the Blinker record, there's that one particular song, "Pretty Pictures."
I'll have
where
to
there's like all these really open, long tom fills, which are a combination of like Iron Maiden stuff, Neil Peart stuff.
I got to listen
and
back
especially
and check it out.
philcollins.
I think what's really interesting about what you said is like when you get in a room with Greg and Ken, for example, if I'm following correctly, like that, their individual styles and how it affects what you're going to come up with is really a lot more how you found your identity, being with the guys that you were actually playing with and around, as opposed to, you know, there are some people that are just mimicking, which I don't think you did, but, you know, we can acknowledge that there are people in LA especially that might have heard Motley Crue anywhere and said, hey, I'm going to start a band that sounds just like Motley Crue. I'm going to be Tommy Lee. And that happened throughout the 80s and 90s.
To completely answer to your question, I've learned and developed the most from the people that I've played with. In saying that, I definitely learned a lot, and my style changed a lot previous to Failure, but when I joined Failure is when I became the drummer.
Found your identity as
like, no matter what I do outside of Failure, like you always know it's me. So my biggest influence is Ken and Greg and the way I respond to the Failure music.
Watch yourself now, bouncing off the future glass. All alone, not a soul alive, a code to crack. Careful who you want, the screen is full, the pull is cold. You're just a stranger, a loser with the heart of gold. Don't you worry, there's nobody. Don't feel sorry.
I think that with Failure, you guys are in a situation where you guys really complement each other. Where if you take one guy out, it's not going to be the same.
It wouldn't be the same.
And
it
that's
wouldn't
really
work.
refreshing. Now, you did play in some other bands for a while, and I wanted to talk about that. There was, if I'm skipping over anything, please fill in the gaps. But
There's a lot. I don't even remember. You might remember things that I don't.
In between when Failure initially broke up or stopped playing, and when you were in Veruca Salt, am I skipping anything? Because I do want to get like.
Well, it started in, I think probably around the time or just before Failure officially broke up. Louise and I met in LA. We had some friends in common, and she saw me play. I think she knew Failure a little bit, but had never seen me play before. And she had just broken up with Nina.
Okay.
And she was trying to go at her own. And she did an EP and actually flew me out to Chicago. And I lived with her, and we wrote and recorded some stuff that initially started an EP that she was beginning to work on. So I did it in that capacity. It wasn't until years later, I think in probably 2006 or 7, that I actually joined the band.
Gotcha.
And we did that Veruca Salt 4 record. And then we did some touring and stuff like that.
I was a fan that was sort of missing, you know, hearing your playing and wanting to at some capacity. So when that happened, I got really excited.
I play best when I'm in a band.
Yeah, well, of course.
Like I'm the kind of drummer that is only like by myself. I have shit to play. But when I play with musicians, like just something happens when I respond to music that everything opens up, and I have a much better like stream of conscious. Like it just takes off.
Well, it's a great conversation.
Like I would never be a great clinician or. Yeah. I mean, although I do give lessons, I mean, there's something about that sparks me playing, but generally I'm at my best when I'm playing with other musicians.
You're not showing up to, a guitar sensor drum off anytime soon. I'm sure you could, but it's not really as appealing to you as
I couldn't. That's not my thing.
Now, during your tenure there, at what point now, you you guys eventually got back together. Was there anything in between, or was it just was it failure into Veruca and then back?
Well, first it was failure into, I did that one-off recording with Louise, and then I joined Jordan Zadarozny, Blinker the Star.
That's right. Thank you for filling that blank. I actually was familiar with that.
I was tied to that for a while, for a couple years. And we did a record for DreamWorks, which Ken mixed and engineered. That one I really loved because it allowed me to play not just like a rock drummer. Mm-hmm. Like I was saying earlier, those big tom fills like philcollins, like I got to sort of branch out and not just be a rock drummer.
Do you ever notice or think to yourself that some drummers oftentimes have a hard time adapting to a situation where maybe your playing might be affected by the player, whereas you take some drummers, you put them in any situation, they almost kind of like can't. You know what? I'm sure I'm not going to offend anybody by saying this, but you take a drummer like Lars Ulrich or something, or some of these guys, you throw them into a situation with another group of musicians, it might not really translate that way. And for you, it seems like you have that skill. You know, it's a rare skill that doesn't come to all musicians.
I completely get what you're saying, and I honestly, going back to I give lessons. A large part of what I do when I give lessons is try to teach people to turn their brain off. Music is not for your brain. It's not a thinking process. Like you find it in the place where you're not thinking is where you're free.
Right.
Your brain will get in your way.
Yeah.
Because you can never think as quickly as you need to respond to music. My ability to do that only comes from that gift. When I play, like, I'm not thinking about it. It's just happening. I'm being taken away.
And I think that's what makes you...
So when you go back to a Lars
drummer.
Lars Ulrich has all of the skill in the world.
Yeah.
If he didn't think, and it's just like social situations, when you're around a new group of people and you, like, can't find the words because you're thinking about how you're gonna... That's the only reason why.
That's a really good analogy.
The same thing happens with music. If you can not think and just like disappear and respond to what you're listening to, anybody can play with anybody.
That's really refreshing to hear, especially if you're teaching people that.
You get in your own way, and you do it in your life too. It's not just a drum thing. Like drums are a very small part of what my teaching is about.
I love that. That's and let me ask you too. First of all, that is really refreshing and cool to hear, because even though I think I can relate to that, I've never put it into words that way. So it's really nice to know that that there are people learning this without going through the same old sort of rudiments or what have you as they are like looking to become a musician. And now when you do your lessons, are we who are your students? How do you find them? Is it something that are you doing on Skype, or is it in LA?
Most of them find me. One student was a friend of mine for a while, and his doctor said, for therapeutic reasons, that you should go and like learn drums or something.
Wow, that's so cool.
And he called me, and I think what his doctor didn't necessarily know, there's this thing like that people do when you come across something that you call a problem. You think about the problem and think about the problem and think about the problem and think about the problem, and of course it stirs up the way you feel and your emotions and all of that stuff, and before you know it, you become part of the problem. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And your thinking no longer becomes linear, like in a straight line moving forward, which is where the solution to the problem lives. Your thinking becomes really circular.
Right.
And it doesn't go anywhere, and it doesn't solve anything. You just become part of the problem, and then your emotions kick in, and then it destroys you.
Yeah.
There's another thing that happens, especially in people that are, a little older, 20s, 30s. The only reason that, and I use this word, but this isn't the real word, it becomes more difficult for people as you get older to learn, say, playing drums. So part of the teaching process is, and it goes for anything, if anyone listening, whenever you've learned something and you feel that pressure inside of your head, That's not difficult. That literally is a process going on in your head where you're having to unwire what's already there and rewire this new thing that you're learning. So you're not a bad drummer. There literally is a physical process that your brain has to go through in order for you to be able to do this thing. So people aren't bad or good at stuff.
I like that outlook.
You just learning is rewiring your brain and creating new neural pathways, and people usually give up in that painful process and go on to something easier that they're in some way already wired to, you know.
It's a really good approach to encourage somebody as a teacher.
Like, a lot of these people aren't going to become professional drummers and da-da-da-da-da. Like, you know, it's just this cool thing they're learning. They should know what else it's doing in their life.
Yes.
Like, I have people, like, people who are, like, you know, have depression and medication, and they're constantly, and some people are born with, there's something wrong with their brain.
Sure. Yeah.
Other people have this habit of constantly just not, the inability to stop thinking, or they've always learned to think about everything. And it literally is them driving themselves insane.
I think you just summed up, too, what a huge benefit music can be to one's life when you really look at it.
Well, people have proven that
of,
just music itself, just listening to it, can be an extremely therapeutic thing.
Yeah, but also as a musician and as a professional musician, too, I think that you almost kind of helped open a door for anyone listening to really see it for a more pure sense, and how that really should be the more important thing versus, you know, some folks who focus on, just like life, you were saying, we're kind of using analogies here, focusing on, I don't want to say the wrong things because everyone's different, but the things that aren't really going to be pure or honest or really help you in the long run emotionally and deep down inside. Also, don't want to forget that we're out here talking to you about promoting your new record and the tour, and you're out with Swervedriver. So bring us up to speed on how the reception has been, how the tour has been going.
Like, I mean, any time you get to, like, finish a record and go out on the road and, like, sit in the same room with the people that really, really love your music, and you have this, again, back to a shared experience that you can only get by playing that stuff live to the people that it resonates with. It's just, I mean, you can't really put it into words. I mean, it's just something, unless you've experienced it, like, you can't really describe the experience.
It's much bigger than you, right?
Yeah.
Because you're playing to, in this case tonight, to a room of probably 800. Yeah. Oh no, wait, this is actually more of a over 1,000 people.
Yeah.
This venue holds, but just having that.
Hopefully, all those people show up.
Right. Well,
we'll see.
But just that thing where music's bigger than you, and you're on stage, and it's almost like a tribal feeling, and there's people that you don't even know what's going on through their minds, but there's something special happening.
You get the privilege of, when people walk in the door, whatever they had going on, good or bad or indifferent, it's gone for 75 minutes. All my favorite musicians did that for me when I was a kid, and I mean, it's a relief.
It's something that people don't realize is, like, kind of when you're on tour, you're promoting a record, you're promoting your band, but you're also spreading, I don't want to sound like a cornball, but, like, you're also, like, spreading, you're kind of spreading love around, you know, and I hate to sound like a cornball, but it's true.
Or, I mean, you know, it could be hate too. I mean, it doesn't.
It could, depending on what kind of music it is, you know.
I mean, it's kind of indescribable.
Well,
I mean,
so
it depends.
the tour with Swervedriver is such a great package, and you know,
the Unicorn Tour.
The Unicorn Tour.
Yeah.
Do you have any? I'm sure maybe it's a little premature because you're still out doing this, but is there anything you want to plug coming up after this, or?
You know, obviously we still have like a month of tour dates all the way from Brooklyn here back to the West Coast. We're doing a couple shows up in Canada, through the Midwest and down the West Coast. we had a lot of stuff going on before this, so a lot of what happens once we get home, we're not entirely sure of.
Mm-hmm. We're just happy that you're back because some of us waited a long time. I didn't actually get to see Failure the first time around, so tonight will be my third time since you guys got back together.
Yeah.
I think the new record is freaking awesome.
You're OG now.
Yeah, I'm an OG now. And
I love the new record. Ken's in the room now. The record, the records just keep sounding better and better and better and better.
Yeah. Well, I recently, on my day job at Revolver, we had you pick out your top 10, I believe it was your top 10 records of 2018. And
that was a fun list.
Yeah, I'm curious.
I think it threw a couple people for a loop.
Yeah, you actually named a few that were surprising, one of them being Daughters, which who they just played here recently.
Check this out. So a couple years ago, I can't remember his name. There's this dude up in Seattle, and we would talk from time to time. He'd hit me up, and I gave him my email, and he's like, I got this thing, and I want you to record drums from it, and I got a couple other guys who are going to do it. Like, one's in Rhode Island, and one's, I think he was in Chicago. The singer was in Chicago. And I'd never heard of any of these guys. We'd never met. And he's like, yeah, I want you to talk. I recorded a couple drum things on there. He's like, I want you to talk to the guitar player. He used to be in this band, Daughters. And I was like, all right.
Sure.
I'd never heard of them. So I got on the phone and talked to Nick a couple times. He was in Rhode Island. He's like, yeah, the stuff you play is really cool. And I'm about to do some guitar stuff on this. The whole project did wind up fizzling out. We'd never finished it.
Oh, so you were almost going to play with him.
Well, no, we did play.
That's really cool.
Yeah, we did play. I recorded drums on something, then he added guitars to it, and it was this online through the internet thing.
Right.
But I spoke to him, and I spoke to him a couple times, and it wasn't until Daughters got back together, and I was like, oh my God, this stuff's amazing. And I didn't even remember. It didn't click with me. Mm-hmm. And then just kind of out of nowhere, I was like, wait a minute. I was in this weird kind of internet band with one of those guys.
Right.
Which guy was it? Oh, it was Nick. And so we started talking a little bit again through social media and over the phone text message. And I went and saw them before we left out in
What
LA.
a show. The last
Dude,
time I
that
was
record
here, I
has
saw
become definitely one of my favorite. I've never heard anything like it. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool that you pay attention to
And
what's
their
current,
live show is ridiculous. It literally is you've seen a million bands, and it's a rock band, and they're on stage, and this is what they're going to do, and you're kind of ready for it, and totally different.
Yeah.
The feeling you get watching one of their shows is just like nothing else.
Well, if anyone,
it's a unique experience. It's still a band. It's still loud. It's still in a dirty rock club, but it's just what the hell?
I was intrigued when I saw that, and I urge anybody listening, if you're a
unique
fan,
combination of rhythms and sounds, and it's you got to go check out a
cool.
Daughters show.
And I mean, beyond that, I was going to say, if you want to check out Kellii's top 10 records of 2018, I believe it was, visit revolvermag.com and just search Kellii Scott Failure. It should pop up.
pushaT was on there.
Yes, that was another one.
My beautiful wife over there. Actually, you can't see her, audience, but she's there, and she's more beautiful than on a microphone. She turned me on to that record. Is rad.
That's
it's
awesome.
Such a great record.
Well, Kellii, we've learned so much about you on this episode, and now we've learned that you're a loving husband, and you're a drum teacher, you're a great drummer, and a great philosopher.
Nice. I appreciate that.
With great taste in current music. So we're just happy that we were able to have
Sometimes I like some bad stuff too. Obviously, I didn't put those on the list. But.
Well, unless you, if you have any parting words, we're going to wrap up this episode. I think we got over the...
No, I mean, I think I'll just end it the way I pretty much end everything. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, I want to give props to the regular host, Jody, for setting up this interview with you and allowing me to step in and be a part of it. It's an honor and pleasure. So thank you. And thanks to everyone for listening. And pick up the new Failure record and make sure you catch them when they're in your town, and don't miss any of their shows because they rule. In the future, your body will be the furthest thing from your mind. And there you have it, folks. Yeah. Thanks for listening.
All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and many thanks to Chris and Kellii for making it happen while I was on the other side of the world, trekking across Thailand and Cambodia. We'll have to do something like this again soon. In any case, we'll catch you on the next one, all right? Crash, bang, boom.